guys, welcome to our YouTube channel. We are from Group 3, the Digital Master. We are
a full-time MBA
student and a part-time runner.
We will share what lesson we've got from Professor Sembel and Ibu Yulita, our lecture from IPMI International Business School. It's about running and learning.
The researchers studied the high impact of running improves learning. Running can also help us organize our time better, reduce the level of stress, overcome fatigue, and unlock our true potential. We are capable of more than we assume.
As a part of learning from Professor Sembel and Yulita, we would like to review the book, but it is not about running book. It is about a book from Joseph Stiglitz. He is a winner of the Nobel Prize, and the title is Globalization and its Discontent Have Visited, the Anti-Globalization in the Era Trump. So, let's check it out.
Hello guys, let's have book review summary first. The bulk of Stiglitz' accusation is that globalization is great only if it is properly governed. But the International Economic Institution, IEIs, and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, should ensure such governance have failed the task. The conclusion is that the IMF and the other IEIs, like example the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, have to be reformed to deliver policies that will make globalization more equitable and avoid that it is perceived by many around the world more as a problem than as an opportunity. Globalization might be checked and its great potential benefit might go lost. Most of the book is devoted to chastise the IMF for its failure in three main areas. Number one is crisis management, the East Asian crisis. Number two is development of poorer countries, a problem that Stiglitz doesn't see in the IMF agenda. Number three, transition from planned to market economics, the problems with Russia. More generally, the IMF is accused of having undergone a great mutation from Keynes creature to fight global depression to the cockpit of market fundamentalism and the Washington Consensus. In this regard, Stiglitz stressed that IEI need to have open mindset, then rely on a unique model and refrain from prescribing one-size-fits-all policies that may be harmful. By prescribing seemingly pro-market policies that exacerbate risk of systemic shock, early capital account opening, premature domestic financial liberalization, and the Washington Consensus is undermining globalization. Since they do not cater for the benefits of globalization to be shared and the contrary produce growing inequalities, such policies may have become the most serious obstacle to expand free trade, the extent of market, and accordingly reap larger gains for the world.
Now, we will talk about this chapter. It's about freedom to choose. Stiglitz identified three pillars of Washington Consensus. Number one is fiscal austerity. Number two is privatization. And the last one is market liberalization. First of all, according to Stiglitz, quick privatization policy can be criticized on two grounds. The first ground, expansive aggregate demand policy needs to accompany privatization, with the former creating job to match the job destruction by latter. Privatization have to be fair and transparent to avoid the emergence of corruption. In turn, this requires appropriate legal structures and market institutions to be formed before privatizing. Second, liberalization through the removal of government interference in domestic market, as well as the elimination of barrier to trade and capital exchange with abroad, is designed to promote more efficient market allocation. But this approach may cause more damage than benefit if liberalization is carried out without placing it in its proper context and lacking the proper institutional setup. For instance, not having enough regulation and supervision of banks, early capital account opening, and also domestic financial liberalization are likely to be the sources of instability. The next, according to Stiglitz, sequencing of reform is crucial or liberalization will not be successful. In fact, institution building must come before or at least together with liberalization, and also there must be a social consensus in the nation that is managing such transformation. And the social consensus may only be based on the respect of a social contract where benefits will be widely shared. Unfortunately, the Washington Consensus doesn't worry about the social contract, as it believes in trickle-down economics. For example, the idea that growth will heal the problems it initially causes by itself. But this is not true. In fact, the IPS have recognized that poverty reduction must be explicitly addressed in order to maintain growth. However, here comes the problem of the priorities. If poverty reduction is inserted as the 39th item in the list of 40 objectives, maybe it will not get much attention after all, and it appears to be driven more by a vague intent than by serious concern.
In Chapter 4, we will learn about the East Asia crisis, how the IMF policies brought the world to the verge of global meltdown. IMF policy did not work in managing East Asian crisis because they were wrong, approaching the management of the East Asian crisis with the one-size policy of the Washington Consensus. The IMF founded an intervention on higher interest rate, fiscal austerity, and structural reform. Because of this, the perception throughout the developing world is that the IMF itself has become a part of the country's problem rather than part of the solution. Indeed, in several of crisis countries, people continue to refer to the economic and social storm that hit their nation as the IMF. The single most important factor leading to the crisis was early capital account liberalization, that in turn was thus pushed on the countries by the Washington Consensus, representing the vested of interest of the financial community. There were 3 rounds of mistake IMF. First, applying the East Asia the policy menu elaborate for high public deficit inflation in driven Latin American crisis in the 1980s without taking into account that in the light of the impending recession, the problem of East Asia was lack of aggregate demand and also the East Asia were high leverage. The second round of IMF mistake had to do with the inadequate understanding of the policies needed to address bank and corporate restructuring in the face of the micro-driven large-scale bankruptcy. The third round of mistake of the IMF failure to recognize the harsh policy it was recommending could cause the needs of the East Asia social fabric, lacking social safety net so badly, just to thank its marvelous growth record and even generate turmoil as was clearly the case in Indonesia. At the end of the chapter, Stiglitz proposed his 7-point of strategy to manage the crisis. 1. Follow expansionary fiscal and monetary policies. 2. Promote quick financial restructuring. 3. Financial restructuring needed to be coupled with maintaining finance flow to corporate and standstill of scheduled debt repayment. 4. Financial restructuring could then be followed by real restructuring. 5. However, real restructuring should take place only with special bankruptcy provision, aimed at quick resolution of distress from macro-driven disturbances. 6. Strong temporary intervention by the government is required. And the last one, once all the previous points are in place, firm can effectively benefit from the large exchange rate depreciation.
Now I'm going to present chapter 5, Pulus Russia. Stiglitz maintains that deep problem with the Russia transition from the plan to market economy has been explained considering the shock therapy chosen by the country, especially Western market Bolshevik advisors, the mostly reflecting U.S. Treasury or IMF mindset and policies. The main flaw of this policy were their failure to recognize and give enough weight to social and political issues fundamental to the transition and to the understand that institutions with the same name, for example a bank, and the Western homogeneous existed under the USSR with a totally different rules. More attention in this issue would only change to the choice from the shock therapy to gradualism and a success of China testified. According to the Stiglitz, a sample of disaster of the shock therapy largely exists. First, a partial price liberalization accompanied by stabilization and friendly privatization played a major role in the emergence of the rent-seeking capitalists in Russia, and it was only made worse by the early capital account opening, allowing massive capital flow out of the country. In addition, considering its fiscal problem, Russia couldn't afford build a needed safety nets. If the near cost of the Russia in 1998 default was Asian crisis and the fall of oil prices, the long overvalue ruble built the background condition by depressing the economy, helping the oligarchs drive capital out and lowering confidence in the country. The IMF often led Russia to resist the speculative attack by borrowing heavily in the foreign exchange that can be rationalized with the attempt to the automate the market order, close the devaluation option. There was a heated debate across the 19th Street about making future large loan to the Russia in July 1998, since some believe that this would only worsen situation. The default coming in August renewed the global financial crisis, while the oligarchs gained the Western bank were helped to limit their losses to burn an additional loan was eventually borne to by Russian taxpayers. Finally, the good news was the wild devaluation of the ruble restored the economy, proving that the Russian economic failure had to do with the both lack the supply and the lack demand caused the overly tight policies. Russia had a good company most other transition economies. Its case is paramount example of the failure of the transition. The big persistent drop in GDP was coupled with the increased poverty and inequality. Stiglitz asked how much of it could be avoided through the better policies. He claimed that extremely anti-inflation policies drove the ruble overvalue and blocked aggregate demand, provoking the industrialization, privatization without proper tax, institutional and corporate government setup, cost asset stripping by oligarchs and even by local government. The major drive to support the oligarchs came in 1995 when the Yeltsin launched a massive privatization through the loan share swap with the banks controlled by his friend. At the same time, ignorance toward the increasing poverty led a violation in the social contract, in turn destroy social capital and trust and prevented market from well functioning. The above shows that the problem with the shock therapy was not the speed, rather in its wrong incentive, a lack of the understanding on the administration building lead policies with the comprehensive depressing effect on the rural middle class keystone of the market economy. There were further aggravate a lack of focus on independent media. Next topic in chapter 6, unfair trade law and other mischief. Stiglitz stated of the problem with the Russian faulty transition and the choice of wrong policies come not only from the choosing the wrong horse, quote by Yansis, but also from the trying to avoid a public discussion both in the US and the international level. Stiglitz believed that the failure was not result of the deliberate attempt to weaken Russia, although the US or Western interests were taking care of when the July 1998 loan allowed for bailing out of the investment bank, but it simply depend on the bad economic policies.
On Chapter 7, Better Roads to the Market. Two examples of countries that pursue unsuccessful alternatives. Both of them is not following the Washington Consensus. It's Poland and China. Both of a more gradualist approach as opposed to shock therapy. Key elements of Poland's strategy is gradual privatization while building up banking and legal system. And the second one is emphasize importance of democratic support for reforms, benefits for unemployed, and adjusting pension for inflation. Key elements of China transition is partial privatization, beginning with agriculture, individual responsibility system. The second one is township and village public enterprises. The third one is two-tier pricing, using all prices under quota system and market set prices. The fourth one is creation of institutional infrastructure and opening to foreign investment. And the last one is prioritize creating competition and new jobs over privatization and restructuring to maintain social stability. Road to the future. Russia needs to go beyond focus on macro stabilization and encourage economic growth. To do this, Russia must create an investment-friendly environment, establish a federal structure that provides incentives at all levels, establish political and social stability, and collect taxes. While Russian leaders should be held accountable for a failure of economic reform, so should IMF and Western leaders.
Okay, on this chapter is about the market fundamentalists dominate the IMF. However, IMF needs to identify instantly in which market fails and analyze how particular policies make effort or minimize damage done by these failures. So the example of the inconsistency in IMF policy is in these some points. Example number 1 is the intervention IMF to sustain the exchange rate. Why is this intervention desirable when the intervention is so undesirable in the other market? Example number 2, IMF attempt to quarantine contagion or to isolate economic crisis in one country from spreading to other countries. But in Asian financial crisis, IMF spread the disease rather than containing it. Example number 3, overly simplistic understanding of balance of payment deficit. They need to consider what money is actually being used for. Example number 4, by providing funds for governments to bail out Western creditors when loans aren't repaid, IMF has caused creditors to weaken incentive to ensure the debt will be paid. Borrowers are encouraged to incur excess risk rather than buying insurance because they count on an IMF bailout. Number 5, IMF began to condition approval of loans to a country on participation by the private sector. For example, if a country can raise a minimum amount of money from private banks, it might not be able to receive funds from the IMF. So the last example of the inconsistency of IMF's policy. In 1999, IMF decided to expand its role to be the lender of last resort, a role previously played by central banks. But country pay IMF back first, and if the country have more money, they're gonna go to private lender after the IMF. This result effect for need of risk premium and higher private sector interest rates. So, what is all about? EMS is pursuing interests of the financial community, especially foreign creditors, which are often in conflict with objective of enhancing global stability. EMF pursue the sanctity of the credit contract or bailout to prevent bankruptcy over the sanctity of the social contract. So the government obligation to provide basic social and economic protection to its people. Stiglitz suggests that EMF should take strategies more sympathetic to the debtors, work to get economic back on track before building up foreign reserve, explore other ways of providing short-term stability. But EMF blamed Asian crisis on bad policy and lack of transparency of Asian government. They were really just trying to shift the blame for the failure of the EMS policy. Well, capital market liberalization lead to speculation, financial market liberalization to bad lending.
Chapter 9. The way ahead problem is not with globalization, but the way it has been managed. Part of problem lies with international economic institutions. These institutions need to be reshaped so they can help reshape globalization. Government has an important role in mitigating market failures and ensuring social justice. Social cohesion is key for economics to function. Economists continue to disagree on role of market versus states. The IMF presents as doctrine recommendation for which there is not widespread agreement. This is attributable to the IMF market fundamentalist ideology, which is so strong that IMF has failed to consider empirical evidence that their policies led to instability. Globalization has increased the need for global collective action and the importance of global public goods. Recommendation. Number 1. Change institutional mindset by giving voting rights to developing countries. Number 2. Fundamental reforms in governments of IMF and World Bank will be difficult to obtain in the short term. Increase number of African seats even if it is impossible to increase their voting rights. Number 3. Help fund a think tank to outline policy recommendation on behalf of developing countries. Number 4. Increase openness and transparency of the international economic institution. Number 5. IMF should be limited to core area of crisis management and stop being involved in economic of transition and development. Key reforms for international financial system. Accept dangers of capital market liberalization with large externalities intervention are often desirable. Bankruptcy reform. IMF should not finance bailouts when private borrowers cannot repay creditors. Bankruptcy reform should recognize the special nature of bankruptcies that arise out of macroeconomic disturbance. Less reliance on bailouts. Improve banking regulation. Need less ideological approach to regulation adapted to the capacities of each countries. Improve risk management. One possibility is to have creditors absorb the risk of large real interest fluctuations. Improve safety nets. Unemployment insurance program. Improve response to crisis. Interests of workers and small business need to be balanced with those of creditors. Return to basic economic principles. IMF needs to return to original mandate of providing funds to restore aggregate demand in countries facing economic recession. Reforming the World Bank and development assistance. Successful countries have pursued comprehensive approach to development of the country. Development not just resources and capital, also transformation of society. Assistance should be provided based on selectivity, giving aid to countries with proven track records rather than conditionally imposition of conditions, often political, on assistance. Developing countries also need debt forgiveness in order to grow. 24 countries have now passed the threshold for debt forgiveness, but this needs to be expanded further. Reforming the WTO and balancing the trade agenda, November 2001, Doha, Qatar, development round of trade negotiation finally put on agenda the redressing of past imbalance of WTO. WTO needs to be more balanced in addressing developing countries' interests and concerns that go beyond trade, environmental concerns. International economic justice requires developed countries to take steps to open up fair trade with developing countries outside of WTO frameworks. Examples: Europe's Everything But Arms initiative allows free importing of all goods except arms from poor countries. Toward a globalization with a more human face, there needs to be a multiple-pronged reform strategy. Reform of international economics arrangement and reform that each country can take on itself. Developed country must eliminate trade barriers. Developing countries need to manage their budgets better, establish effective regulation, and set up effective governments. With accountability, openness, and transparency, developing countries need freedom to make their own choice. Need policies for sustainable, equitable, democratic growth. Development is about transforming societies.